Alright, so this is my rendered image of the rocket ship. I've actually assigned quite a few repeated materials, so a lot of the nuts and bolts as well as the handrail have similar brush metals or chromes to it, and I had a lot of fun with the car paint material. The launch pad is a car paint material, as well as the leg shell and the rocket shell, and then the dome. The next part that we're going to do is put a bump map onto the ground surface. Now, if you don't have Photoshop or any of those particular softwares, just take a screenshot of this particular texture. So I will put it on my screen. If you don't know how to screenshot, then Google it. I know on Macs it's Command-Shift-4. And let's see, that's the displacement. I think I renamed it bump, but you can, let's see here, that's not the one. That's the mountain diffuse, dirt diffuse, and I'm going to do it again. So let me just open up Photoshop, and the bump texture is going to help break up a lot of the detail on the surface of our object. So now that I'm in Photoshop, I'm simply going to go to open a recent texture. I'll go to my layers, double click, press OK, click on the image, adjustments, desaturate, and then I will go to, let's go to image, adjustments, and then levels. Okay, so I'll drag this guy over to the right so I can build more contrast, and I'll drag this one to the left. All right. And that should do it for me. Press OK. File, save, scene as, and I'll make sure it is a targa. Dirt level 1, I'll call it terrain underscore bump. It's okay. So go ahead and screen capture this. I'll give you a few seconds. If not, then you can always rewind. Let's go through there. Okay. So I'll click on the ground, or the terrain, and scroll all the way down until we get to the geometry tab. Underneath there's it says bump mapping. I'll click on that tab. File. I'll open the terrain bump. It's right there. So I'll change all files. Press open, and now you're going to see the ground have a pattern to it, displacement. Well, it's a bump, but not displacement. Now, the issue with this particular bump, and actually I like the height of that bump. It's at a value of 1, and it's perfectly fine for me. Alright, so let me show you how I just did that. So I'll click on the terrain, click on the bump mapping, I'll go into the inputs, and then there's a file, and then there's a place 2D texture. I need to make sure that my repeat UVs are the same as the texture for the terrain, and there you go. That looks pretty cool. I'm feeling that. Now, I actually created a sphere and put it inside of the rocket ship so that it will glow, and I also took this particular mesh. It's the same process. I changed some parameters, so let me show you exactly what that looks like. So I'm going to render, and I'll put it on the perspective. Okay. So if I look in here, It's a polygon sphere. Okay. And what you have to do is you have to click on your polysphere shape, go to Arnold drop down, change the poly mesh to mesh light, and then from the mesh light we're going to change the exposure to a value of 5 and turn the light visible on, and that's pretty much it. I move the sky up so that it will illuminate inside, and these little guys, I did the same exact thing. So this is a combined geometry. I went to the Arnold tab, changed the Arnold translator to mesh light, light visible, and then I changed the exposure to value of 2. Alright, now the last thing that we want to do is change the SkyDome to have our Milky Way HDRI background. So this SkyDome is found under Arnold Lights SkyDome Light. Okay, so I already have a SkyDome light. If you accidentally click on that again, then your scene will become much brighter. But in your outliner, which is found under Windows Outliner, you can simply delete the AI SkyDome 2 so that it takes you back to just regular lighting. So I'll click on the SkyDome here in the outliner or in your viewport, and then under the color we're going to input a file, and that file, so the attribute editor file 6, we're going to open that little manila folder and look for our Milky Way small.hdr. Again, I found this on the HDR Labs website. So HDR Labs has a SIBL archive, and it's found right here under the Milky Way. So let me open that Milky Way small, and once it decides to open, we're going to get something completely different than what we had before. Right, so scene is much darker. You can always increase the light source of our HDRI image. So I'm going to click on this, and background is a little bit blurry. I'm going to change my perspective shape camera in the Arnold view to the rocket camera shape to see exactly what I'm looking at. Okay, and now I'm going to change the, well, when I get ready to render, I can change the resolution from 1000 to 2000. I can increase the exposure to the value of 1, and that will help to lighten it up a little bit. But I'm actually going to use different kind of lights to lighten up my image versus changing the exposure of my HDR image. So I'll change that back to 0. It's totally up to you. Preferably I like how dark the background image is. If I press E on the SkyDome light, I can change what I see in the background. So maybe I want that kind of huge bright light, or maybe I kind of want this light to come from the left side of the scene, like this. And you can see it really helps with the specularity on the side of the rocket ship. And maybe I might use a directional light to cast shadows from the rocket ship onto the ground. Now, in the direction that it's at right now, the shadows, okay? So if I use this as my main light source, all right, and I can always use other lights. Let me try to draw with my grease pencil. All right, so there's my grease pencil. So I could have rays shooting from this light source going this way, and this is my rough illustration of directional light. What's going to happen is that when I look at the floor, okay, and if that light source again is coming from here, then I'm going to lose a lot of that detail from the shadows being casted onto the ground because that rocket is in the way. But if I change the angle of the light source, the HDR image, and the directional light, then I'll be able to have the rocket ship on the ground and a lot of the structural information on the ground. So I think that might be more appealing. And there's the tip of that rocket. So let me try that out, and I'll go to Arnold light, and we don't have a directional light in here, so I'll go to create light, directional light, move the sky up, move it to the left. I'll press R to increase the size of it. It doesn't increase the exposure or anything like that. And again, like I said, I'm going to take the reference of the HDR image and kind of bring it this way a little bit more. And I'll take that light source and maybe hit it from this direction, like that. And I'll rotate this guy again, just a little bit more. I'm not getting any like cool galaxies or anything like that in the background, but it's quite alright. If I wanted to, I mean, again, no one knows if the sun is off to the left. So if you like that image in the background here, you know, you can always add a light source coming from, you know, this direction and hitting onto the ground, or even from the right to the left. I mean, we're in the universe, right? Somewhere in the universe or in the galaxies, and there's lots of things that could be emitting light, and you can even see from here. There's like this huge light source right there, huge light source right there. So, and look, even right there too. So it totally makes sense to have this directional light coming from anywhere. All right, so it's not really set in stone. I just don't want so much of that in my scene. It looks kind of cool there. Let's just do a little bit of it, I guess. It's kind of interesting to look at. Okay, so I'll take my directional light and I'll change the direction of it to be from here. And I'll press E to rotate my directional light. And now I'll go into my attribute editor, go to Arnold, and turn the exposure up to, let's say, 5. Alright, that's way too bright. Change the value 2. Value 1. And let's see here. It is illuminating my scene. I am getting shadows here on some of these mountains. I'm not seeing them in my image, probably because of the this mountain shape here. But if I rotate that light source this way, I might be able to see some of the shadows. So let me just put this light here, angle it over here. Now I'm trying to accomplish something by getting shadows, and with the light source, the exposure being at a value of 1, it's really making this scene too bright for me. So instead of using the directional light, I'm going to use area lights. I'm going to light my scene with area lights. And I'm going to bring up my reference image that we used earlier in the tutorial. So I'll press Control A to bring up my we go. And let me move this out the way. I'm not for sure if I deleted that reference image. I think I did, which is unfortunate. But I have it in my source images folder. So let's take a look at that. Spaceship, source images, and there we go. So in this image, it's really blue here, and then really dark up here, and we don't have an image to do that with. There's a lot of light coming from the left side of the rocket, and it looks like there's only maybe one light source. Alright, so let's try to get something similar to that. Okay. So let me try to rotate this around a little bit more. And let's see what that side has to offer the camera. Let's see if it's any brighter. Not really, but I do like the intergalactic dust, and then it's a bit darker here. So I'm gonna use this side, and that's pretty interesting there. Yeah, it looks much better. Okay, so I'll go to Arnold, Light, and I'll create an area light. Okay, so this area light, I'll rotate like this, and I'm going to move it right there, move it up, kind of angle it at the object, okay? And I'll scale it up. This isn't going to influence the amount of light that emits from it. Okay, so with this light, what I'm going to do is just change the color so I can see how much of it is actually influencing our scene. Change the exposure to, let's say, 5. And you can see the light here. If I change it to 12, then it is extremely bright. I could move it back this way, and you could see that the intensity on my scene is actually going down. Or I can just change the exposure to 11, right? And there's not as much light being emitted on here. Maybe change it to 10. And if I bring it down, there we go. So that's what it's hitting, all of these objects in my scene. Maybe I'll change the color to a soft blue, because it is outer space. And this highlight is really bright on there, so either move this object back, or I select my spaceship, the rocket ship, and that was the rocket shell. I could change the roughness. I could change the coat, the roughness of the coat to be a little bit more, and then it starts to soften that specular highlight. You see, so it's not so bright on there. It just kind of like disperses that huge bright white. Okay, looks pretty cool. We could add another area light to the back side of the rocket ship so that it doesn't kind of like fade into black there. So I want to change the exposure of that light source down a little bit more. Okay. Feels a bit more natural. The bottom of the rocket ship isn't as well lit, so we can always, add more light to that particular area. So I'll take this light source, I'll press Control D, and I'll move it, Control D in that light source, and then I'll move it over here, right behind the object. Right? So this is kind of like 3-point lighting. And as you can see, it's helping to add that rim light to it. And I can put this light underneath, like looking straight up. At the rocket ship. So now you can see the level of influence here, right? We got some light source coming over here. And maybe we could change that color. Maybe we could use, I don't know, like some colors from the stars. So if I click on that color, I can go to the color picker and I could pick any of these colors. So if I pick something like, I don't know, just anything that stands out to me. That actually looks pretty cool. Alright, so we'll add maybe just a few more lights to the scene. I would really like to see some parts of the engine being illuminated, and maybe parts of the mountain being illuminated with some of the light. Nothing, too overpowering. Let's see here. And I know that from the image, some of the legs were illuminated. So I'll take that same light that we had earlier from the front, okay, and then I'll duplicate it. I'll move it straight down. And then there's this really cool thing that you can do with any source, any object selected. You can click on the panels, look through selected. So now I'm the light, right? So I'm zooming in and I'm looking up at the rocket ship, right? So you could see what's being reflected in here, right? As I move, it's helping to illuminate some parts of that rocket. So, see something like that. Now when it gets too close to the surface, it creates a really hot spot. So let me get back out of there and go in my camera, on my perspective camera, and move this guy up so that I don't have that huge hot spot. And kind of fix that up. So as I'm rotating this, I'm looking at what's going on in my perspective or my rocket camera, because that's the most important, camera, is what we see from there, not from anything else. So as I'm just trying to illuminate that area, I could also use that guy, the crop. Okay. So as I'm rotating it up, you can see that a lot of that highlight is moving away from the surface of the ground. Okay. And I could even change that color if I wanted to. Maybe, let's see, change that color to something a bit brighter, maybe. Because this surface here is actually really dark, so it's not going to like reflect light the same way this area is. Okay. So there are like lots of little things that you could do. You can add a spotlight, you know, pointing straight down here. We could add, you know, a spotlight pointing straight down from each one of these individual light sources here. There's so much that we can do, but for the sake of time and that's pretty much it. Time is what's going to prohibit me from adding more. You can always continue to add more and more to your scene, but I want to go over some final render settings. So feel free to add more lights to the mountains. You can put a light source behind it, and let me show you what that might look like if you use that. So I'll press Control D and move the sky over here and put this right behind the mountains, and maybe add a little bit of like a rim light to the top. Let's see, is that doing anything? Sometimes if there's not any sort of like specularity, it's going to be harder to see what the influence of light is doing, but you can see like right here it's already adding, you know, like a really interesting touch to it. Let me put it in front. Let's see. It's kind of illuminating that. So if you think the mountains are a little bit too dark, then you could just duplicate that same light source and kind of jog it along the background there. You see, so it will also help to separate the mountains from blending in with that structure here. Control D, move this over here. And then one more. And I'll just kind of let it stay dark on this side so that there's a lot of contrast. We have really good contrast with the way our rocket ship is set up in this environment. And I'm going to tweak it just a little bit more. Okay, so without going into too much detail for your final render settings, I'll go to the window. And I'm sorry, there's one thing I have to do. Just kind of, because it's a little bit too bright on that mountain for me. It's drawing too much of my attention there. So Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings. I'll make sure under the Common tab, I'm not doing any sort of batch rendering, so it doesn't matter that it's in the perspective camera, but most times you're going to put it in the rocket camera. My presets are going to be HD 1080. Okay. And I'll just kind of zoom out here. I'll go to the rocket cam. Okay. And I click on the 1:1, and that's going to frame that. And we'll go to the Arnold render. Change the camera AA to 5, diffuse to 3, specular to 3, transmission to 4, subsurface scattering to 3. I'll go to the filter, it's fine. The ray depth, diffuse to 2, specular to a value of 2. I'll keep the transmission at this, and there aren't any sort of final, there's no volume or any sort of like atmospheric effect, which would be really awesome. But before I let this go, in the next tutorial, I'm going to teach you guys how to add depth of field, and we'll have our final render view. So thanks for watching. Again, we're at the last phases of rendering this rocket ship. And I hope you guys like, share, and subscribe.